They say a mother's love is unconditional, but they never tell you what happens when that love is betrayed by the very child you raised with your own hands. I returned home early to surprise my family, only to open a locked door and discover that the monster destroying my life wasn't a stranger. It was my own flesh and blood. The rain was hammering against the windshield of my sedan, matching the strange, unsettling rhythm of my heart. It was a dark Tuesday night, the kind where the fog clings low to the ground, obscuring the familiar roads I had driven for 30 years. I wasn't supposed to be home yet. I was supposed to be 3 states away in Chicago, helping my sister recover from her hip surgery for another week. But a persistent, gnawing feeling in the pit of my stomach had forced me to pack my bags early. Call it a mother's intuition or a wife's sixth sense, but I couldn't shake the absolute certainty that something was wrong. My name is Eleanor, and for 40 years I built a life of love and sacrifice. I never imagined that the very foundation of that life would be shattered by the person I loved most in this world. My husband, Arthur, was diagnosed with vascular dementia 3 years ago. He was 70, a man who once built skyscrapers, but now struggled to remember which day of the week it was. He was gentle, though, and harmless. When I had to leave for my sister's surgery, my son, Lucas, and his wife, Chloe, insisted on staying at our house to watch him. Lucas was my pride and joy, a successful marketing executive, or so I thought. He looked me in the eye, hugged me, and said, "Mum, go. Dad is safe with us." We love him. I believed him. Why wouldn't I? He was my son. I remembered teaching him to tie his shoes, holding him when he had nightmares, and cheering for him at his graduation. I trusted him with my life, and, more importantly, with Arthur's life. I pulled into the driveway at 9 p.m. The house was pitch black. That was the first red flag. Arthur was afraid of the dark. We always kept the porch light and the hallway lamp on for him to prevent him from tripping or getting scared. I unlocked the front door, my hands trembling slightly. The air inside was stale, smelling faintly of sour milk and something else, something sharp, unwashed and sickly. "Lucas, Chloe," I called out, but my voice echoed in the empty living room. There was no answer. The silence was heavy, oppressive. I dropped my keys on the table and noticed a stack of unopened mail scattered across the floor, bills and letters that had been walked over. I ran to the guest room where Lucas and Chloe were supposed to be staying. The bed was made perfectly crisp, as if no one had slept in it for days. Panic started to rise in my throat, a hot bile of fear. I rushed to our master bedroom. Empty. The bathroom. Empty. Then I heard it. A faint, rhythmic scratching sound. It was coming from the utility room at the very back of the house, a small windowless space where we kept the furnace and old storage boxes. It was a room we rarely entered. I ran to the door. It was locked from the outside with a heavy sliding bolt that we had installed years ago to keep toddlers out, but we never used it anymore. My heart stopped. "Arthur!" I screamed, fumbling with the bolt. It was stiff, rusted from disuse. I used both hands, adrenaline surging through my veins, and yanked it back with a force I didn't know I possessed. The door swung open, and the smell hit me like a physical blow. It was the smell of neglect, of urine and despair. In the corner, curled up on a thin camping mat on the cold concrete floor, was Arthur. He was wearing the same pajamas I had left him in 10 days ago. They were soiled and torn. His face was gaunt, his eyes sunken and wild with terror. Beside him was a plastic dog bowl. Yes, a dog bowl, with dried crusts of a sandwich and an empty water bottle. My strong, dignified husband was shaking uncontrollably, looking up at me as if I were a ghost. He didn't recognize me. He backed away into the corner, whimpering, covering his face with his hands as if he expected to be hit. I fell to my knees, sobbing, trying to pull him into my arms, but he flinched. He was freezing cold. "It's me, Arthur. It's Eleanor. I'm here," I whispered, tears streaming down my face, soaking into his filthy shirt. It took 20 minutes for the paramedics to arrive after I dialed 911 with shaking fingers. They told me he was severely dehydrated, malnourished, and suffering from hypothermia. The doctors said if I had come home on the scheduled date 3 days later, Arth would have been dead. He had been left in the dark, alone, treated worse than an animal in his own home. As I sat in the hospital waiting room, watching the monitors beep beside my fragile husband, the police arrived. Detective Miller was a kind woman with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanour. She asked me where my son was. I told her I didn't know. I tried calling Lucas, but his phone went straight to voicemail. Chloe's did the same, but the truth began to unravel when I went back home to get Arthur's medical records and clean clothes. I found Lucas's laptop tucked under a pile of fashion magazines in the kitchen. He had forgotten to take it in his haste. What I found on that screen destroyed whatever love I had left for him. It wasn't just negligence. It was a calculated execution. Open on the browser were banking tabs. In the 10 days I was gone, Lucas had used a forged power of attorney document to access Arthur's retirement funds. He had drained our life savings, over $200,000, transferring it to an offshore account in the Cayman Islands. There were also flight confirmations. Lucas and Chloe had booked one-way tickets to Spain, departing that very night at 11 p.m. They weren't just leaving. They were fleeing. They had locked a confused, helpless old man in a dark room with a bowl of food, planning to let him die slowly while they lived a life of luxury on his hard-earned money. They had calculated exactly how long he could survive, without proper care, timing their escape to coincide with his potential death. I showed everything to Detective Miller. I watched her face turn from professional curiosity to absolute disgust. "We need to move fast," she said. The police issued an alert to the airport authorities. I sat by Arthur's bedside, holding his frail hand, praying for justice. I kept thinking about Lucas as a little boy, how he used to cry if he accidentally stepped on a bug, how he used to make handmade cards for Father's Day. Where did that boy go? How did he become a monster capable of killing his own father for money? Was it the greed? Was it Chloe's influence? Or was there a darkness in him I had simply refused to see? They caught them at the boarding gate. Lucas and Chloe were sipping champagne in the first-class lounge, celebrating their new life, while my husband was fighting for his in a hospital bed. The police told me later that when they were handcuffed, Lucas didn't ask about his father. He didn't ask if Arthur was okay. He only screamed that there had been a mistake and that the money was a gift. He was more concerned about the spilled champagne than the father he had left to rot. The trial was a nightmare I had to live through awake. I had to sit in the courtroom and look at the son I raised, the boy I breastfed and schooled, as he sat in the defendant's chair, wearing a suit I had bought him for his birthday. His lawyer tried to paint me as an overwhelmed caregiver and claimed Lucas was just trying to manage the finances and that Arthur had locked himself in the room by accident. It was a vile lie. The evidence was undeniable. The forged signatures, the bank transfers dated the day after I left, and the forensic evidence from the lock on the utility room door proved premeditation. They found text messages between Lucas and Chloe, joking about how long the old man would last. Arthur couldn't testify. The trauma had accelerated his dementia. He barely spoke anymore. He was often lost in a world of fear, flinching at loud noises. But I testified. I stood on that stand, my hand on the Bible, and I looked Lucas in the eye. I told the jury how he had promised to protect his father. I told them about the darkness, the cold, and the fear in Arthur's eyes when I found him. I saw the jury members crying. I saw the judge's jaw tighten with suppressed rage. Lucas and Chloe turned on each other in the end. It was pathetic to watch. Chloe testified that it was all Lucas's idea, that he had been gambling and owed massive debts to dangerous people. Lucas claimed Chloe manipulated him, that she threatened to leave him if he didn't get the money to fund her lifestyle. It didn't matter who started it. They were partners in this evil. They were both willing to sacrifice a human life for cash. The judge's sentencing was swift and severe. He called their actions reprehensible and devoid of humanity. Lucas was sentenced to 15 years in prison for elder abuse, attempted manslaughter, and grand larceny. Chloe received 12 years. As the bailiffs led them away, Lucas looked back at me, tears finally in his eyes, mouthing the word, "Mom." I didn't look away, but I didn't smile. I felt nothing. The son I loved had died the moment he turned that lock on his father's door. The man in handcuffs was a stranger. It has been a year since that night. Arthur is physically better, though he is quieter now. He spends his days sitting by the window, watching the birds, finding joy in the smallest things. I had to sell the big house. The memories were too painful. And despite the court ordering restitution, the money Lucas stole is mostly gone, spent on lawyers and debts we didn't know about. We live in a small, ground-floor apartment now, just the two of us. It's modest, but it's safe. People tell me I should forgive, that holding on to anger is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. But they don't understand. Forgiveness is for mistakes. Forgiveness is for accidents. What Lucas did was a choice. He chose greed over love. He chose to torture the man who taught him how to ride a bike. There's no forgiveness for that, only the cold, hard reality of justice. I mourn the loss of my son, but I do not regret ensuring he paid for his crimes. I visit the prison sometimes, not to see Lucas, but to speak to the counselor there. I tell my story to help other families. I tell them to trust, but to verify, to never think it can't happen to me, because monsters don't always hide under the bed or in the shadows of the night. Sometimes we raise them. Sometimes they sit at our dinner table smiling, passing the potatoes, waiting for us to look away so they can strike. I look at Arthur now, sleeping peacefully in his chair, the afternoon sun warming his face. He doesn't remember the basement. He doesn't remember the betrayal. In a way, his disease is a mercy now. It protects him from the truth that would break his heart. But I remember. I carry the memory for both of us. And I know that I did the right thing. I chose the innocent over the guilty. I chose my husband over my son. And if I had to do it all over again, I would make the same choice. Because family isn't just about whose blood runs in your veins. It's about who would bleed for you and who would leave you bleeding. I saved Arthur, and in doing so, I saved myself. This is my reality now, a quiet life built on the ruins of betrayal. But it is an honest life, and for that I am grateful